If you're a beginner, still trying to figure out the DAW, they're pretty complex. This is probably not for you. But if you're already comfortable making music, you've made some tracks before, maybe you've finished some stuff, maybe you've been making music for a really long time, but keep getting stuck halfway through, this video is going to help you finish music. But doesn't a system limit your creativity? We're not trying to systemize making music. We're not just trying to make it like a conveyor belt, like a formula. That's not what's happening here. The usual way that the producers learn to do things is they try to do everything all at once. And it feels that doing it like that is the most creative way. But let me ask you this. If you're a chef serving a meal in a restaurant, you can't plate the meal before you've cooked it. You can't cook the meal before you've got the ingredients. There's a tangible order in the way that you need to do things. You need to source the ingredients first and then cook and combine them together and then plate it up and serve. That's all a system does. It just reorders the things that you're already doing so that you're putting it in the order that makes the most sense. It actually makes you more creative because you're not distracted by non-creative things when you're trying to be in a creative headspace. Okay, so here's what my system looks like in practice. Here's a name, Cam. These are the three big umbrellas that you need to take your ideas all the way to a finished track. So within each category, we have phase 1 and phase 2. And then within each of those, you can separate them into smaller parts as well. And this is where all of the personalization comes in. If I go back here, you can also see there's these green markers here, and these are borders. You need to know when the end of the creative phase is and when the end of the arrangement phase is and where the start of the mix down and where the end of the mix down is as well. And this will really help you to keep going forwards. Now, the main thing here is each of these is separated out into these three umbrella categories because of the different mindsets that you have when you're making music. When you're creating music, you're thinking about things differently to when you're arranging, to when you're mixing. It's the swapping back and forth that actually creates a lot of the problems that people have. So let's talk about the creative stage. Creative stage is separated into two main phases. Phase 1 is the experimental phase. This is where your style is developed from. This is where the uniqueness comes from. And it makes most sense to invest in that at the start because creativity is fickle, it's moody, it's unstable. It doesn't always just show up when you want it to. So here is when we have the blank slate to just innovate and experiment and ride that creative energy. In terms of mindset, you don't need to be making a song at this stage. Here we're just throwing paint at the canvas and seeing what happens. We're trying to take off the songwriting hat. You don't need to do anything functional unless it helps you to be more creative. So the main overarching idea is we want to try and find that creative flow and just ride it as long as we can. Because once we access this creative mindset, things can become really, really easy to do. But if we get separated from that, it can be really hard to force ourselves to just switch back into it. So we want to do it all in one go so we don't have to force ourselves to be swapping back and forth and in and out of it all the time. How do we do this? Pick your rabbit hole. There's so many different rabbit holes in music production. Doesn't matter what it is. Pick your technique, dive into it, and see where it takes you. Okay, welcome now to the functional part of the creative phase. This is the part where you might be a little bit more familiar with. Now we're starting to put together the building blocks to start to create a bit more of a functional song. So here are the problems that this phase is solving. We're not getting stuck in our arrangement if this is done correctly. So we're going to be building all the things that we need now so that the arrangement's really nice and smooth. Where people get caught up is that they don't build enough options in this stage, and their ideas then get stuck halfway through the arrangement. This phase is particularly made to mitigate that problem. So we don't want to go into the arrangement just yet. In this stage, we're going to build out all of the other elements, drums, supporting elements, background elements, grooves. We're going to be connecting our groove together as well. We're going to be making sure we have everything that we need in our arrangement. This makes the arrangement process go really nice and smooth. We're going to be doing things like building macros, creating variations. The details of how you do this stage is very tailorable, but we're going to be staying in our loop. That's the important thing. This is probably going to be the most contentious part, but this is also going to solve a lot of problems. So in terms of mindset, we're still in the creative stage, so you can still experiment with things, but we're just trying not to get too distracted by diving too deep into any particular rabbit hole because we've already done the main experimentation. Now we're doing things that are more functional to how we want the song to feel. We're locking into a genre, we're picking a tempo, we're picking our style and all of this. The outcome for this phase is we want our loop to be ready to be arranged. We want to go through the loop validation process, which we're going to talk about, and we can decide whether or not we're ready to move on to the next stage or do another pass of this. I always have drums and options in my drums. I have my bass line, I have my synths and options in the synths, I have my ambience and options in the ambience. And this becomes very nuanced when it comes to different genres and what your style and sound and vibe is. If you're making house music, it's going to be very different to making techno music. If you're making really minimalistic music, you still do all of this, but each element has more roles. So this is my master loop of everything that is going to go into my full arrangement. So I hope this makes sense. I've first experimented and then I've gone and built this loop up to the point where it's nice and functional and it's a full sounding track. Now we are going into the loop validation phase. This is the end of the creative phase, the last check before going into the arrangement. So this is the point where we're checking to make sure we have everything we need for our full arrangement. And the reason why we do this, I want you to think about this. If you're an author writing a book, or you're writing a big multi-part fantasy saga, the author knows where they're going to take the story. They know the outcome of the story. They know what's going to happen in the end so that they can get there in an interesting way. When they're writing the story, they'll figure out and piece together all the parts in between, but they know the end goal of where they're trying to go towards. And that's important because it allows them to foreshadow things that are going to happen later at the start. You want to know where you're going to go in your arrangement, what's going to happen in the second half of the track so that you can get there in an interesting way in the first half. If you've got that sorted from the get-go, then you won't have nearly as many problems in the arrangement later on. Arrangement is different. It's probably the more conceptual part of music production. I know when I was learning, there was no way that anyone was going to tell me how to arrange music. And that's because I wanted it to sound unique and different. And I wanted it to be a pure reflection of myself. I had an ego. Basically, that's what it was. And that actually ended up making it harder for me to learn because I didn't really learn the fundamentals first. It's kind of like learning how to write with the wrong grip. I learned how to write like this. This weird clamp on this pen that I have means that after about 5 minutes of writing like that, my hand starts cramping. If I had learned how to write just the correct way, that would have saved me a lot of trouble. You can learn how to arrange just solely with trial and error, but in the long run, there will probably be some weird habits that might be hard to break. If you learn an arrangement structure, all that does is it just means that you know a way to do it and some structure, some rules behind it, so you can actively decide not to do that if you want. A lot of electronic music, a lot of progressive club techno breaks the rules. It doesn't really have much of an arrangement. If you want to do that, you have to know what the rules are so you can then break them. The most common problems I see in arrangement, 1, people getting stuck halfway through the arrangement, not really knowing where to go. Or 2, maybe you are getting all the way through the arrangement, but somewhere in the middle it kind of loses focus and gets boring. Or 3, you just get bored of your arrangement because you've listened to it too many times and you start a new loop. That third one's very real. So the great thing about these arrangement problems is that if you've validated your loop properly, we've already done half of the work. Problem number 1. If you know where you're going to go in your arrangement before you start arranging, then it should be pretty easy to get all the way through the arrangement. Problem number 2 and 3, we'll explain those in a moment, okay? My arrangement process is separated into 2 phases that complement each other but have different purposes. Phase number 1 is the sketch. The goal of this phase is to make my way through the whole arrangement start to finish, get the main arc of the story and what what that's going to do. I'm trying to build the foundation of my arrangement, which I can then improve upon later. And I'm also just trying to keep my movements really purposeful. I want to avoid spending too much time on one part, redoing any sections. And also, if you listen too many times, then your track will get to the point where it kind of starts to feel cemented, like you can't change it. And you also just get sick of it. Moving on, arrangement structure. Okay, so again, arrangement structure, even if you don't use it, is important to know because then you can decide not to use it. I'm going to write it out and then we're going to explain what's going on. This is the start, end, intro, focus, break, main, outro. The reason why this arrangement structure exists is just because it defines a basic story structure. If I was to map that out, and let's say this is like energy, time, our intro might be somewhere here, and then we're kind of moving up into our focus, going down into our break, going up into our main section, and going down into our outro. This is just a very simple and intentional storytelling structure. We've got like kind of act 1 over here and act 2 over there. We're making some sort of change in the second half, which is different to the first half. So let's just talk about what happens in each one of these sections. Of the intro, we're creating context, right? That's the main thing. You need context to establish the background information as to why people even care in the first place, right? Focus, the focus. This is our first main section. The main elements are in, but we're not trying to give away too much because we still want somewhere to go, right? So this is that act 1 here. Cool. Break just offers us a moment of contrast so we can build tension into the main section. This is our main payoff, and our outro is our resolution. This is not meant to tell you how to arrange your music. This is just meant to simplify things. So we've got our act 1 and our act 2, our first half, our second half, our A section, our B section. We just need somewhere to go in the arrangement. That's all it is. That's all arrangement is about. It's just providing us a flexible framework so that we can do this. So we can go this way. We don't want to go this way. We don't want to go backwards. We don't want it to be flat. We want it to be, kind of have some interesting movements around it. The thing that people fall into is that they forget about purpose. They forget about intention. They forget about the why, the reason why behind that. So that's what structure is all about. It's just trying to keep your track intentional and purposeful. Phase 2 of our arrangement is what I call P&T, or progressions and transitions. In this stage, now we're focusing on what's happening within our sections, the transitions between the sections, doing things like automations, personalizing once-off moments, foreshadowing, basically anything else to finish our arrangement. What we're not doing is trying to make it sound really punchy and professional, or getting distracted with mixed down related tweaking, things like focusing on the low end or something like this. No one's saying that you can't do that, but we have time for it later on. And if you do it now, you might have to redo it later anyway. So you can see I've drawn this arrow here, and that's the main focus on what progression is doing. So focus, progressions is what's happening between this section. So how am I getting from this side of the focus over to this side of the focus? What am I doing between those 2 points, right? If I was to draw another little energy graph like I did before, time on the bottom, if this is just our focus point, we can do lots of things. We could start here and then kind of like build up energy throughout the focus, or maybe you're starting high and then going low and then kind of building back up, or maybe you're starting low and then just slowly building up over time like this. What we want to avoid is this, just being flat. If it's not changing, if it's not doing anything, it becomes boring very quickly, and we want to avoid that. So we want to make sure that we're doing something to progress within this section and within each one of our sections as well, right? That's our progressions. Whereas our transitions, let's say we're going into our break in this section, our transition is what's happening between the sections in here, right? We have these moments between the sections where we can do something as well. So progression, that's within the sections, and then transitions, that's between the sections. So the outcome here, what's happening at the end of this stage? We're not trying to finish a perfect track here. What we're aiming for is an imperfectly finished arrangement. If you aim for imperfect, then it tends to happen that you actually just finish stuff. And then it's going to be ready to do our final check to make sure that our arrangement is ready for mixing, which we'll get to in a moment. So this is when you'd also go through and look at the transitions between sections, what's happening in here, what's happening in here, what's happening in here. And this doesn't mean that you have to make really fancy and complex transitions. All this means is like, is it transitioning smoothly, or does it feel a little bit abrupt? Or do I want my transition to be just nothing? Is that how I want it to be? Like, do I want to just not have a transition? That also counts. Okay, now for the final check to make sure our arrangement is finished so that we can move on to the mixdown. Step one, we want a little bit of separation from the DAW. At the end of the day, like, music is made for the ears and not for the eyes. So export your track so it's out of your DAW. And then step two, you're not allowed to listen to it for 24 hours. Listen to it first. Like, yeah, sure, that's fine. But you want to take a break. And I would say at least 24 hours. Often hard to do this because we've just finished it and it's really exciting and it sounds really good and you've just exported it out. Sure, you can listen to it a few times, but take at least a 24-hour break of not listening to it, because step three is the first listen. What the hell is a first listen? All right. The first listen is the very first playback after stepping away from your track for a little while. It's a deliberate reset moment so you can come back and listen to your track with fresh ears. It's kind of like pretending that you're listening to your track for the first time, as a listener would be, right? Everyone that listens to your track is going to listen to a track for the first time. It functions as a checkpoint, the last moment before mixing, and it helps you build a plan and spot issues that you have in your arrangement so you can then fix them and move on. But how a first listen works, you want to grab a notepad and a pen. I've got a specific notepad just for first listens. Set your speakers or your headphones at a moderate listening level. Hit play. Don't touch anything. Don't stop it. Play it all the way through and take arrangement notes over time. I write down timestamps of when things happen so I know where it is in the track. I write down what's good and what's bad, and I put a question mark next to things that it's like a thought, like a maybe. So once you've got your notes here, all you need to do is organize that into a priority list, and then you just tick them off one by one. You get to the end of it, and that's it. Your arrangement's done. So it actually gives you an ordered way to finish your arrangement and also just know when it's done. Again, we're looking for that imperfectly finished arrangement, not a perfect polished product, because the next stage is the mixdown. Mixdown is often the scary part. It's misunderstood, okay? This stage, you can kind of feel like you're stuck in quicksand. Like the more you move around, the more you fight it, the more that you try and make it work, the deeper you sink, unless you're clear about what you're focusing on. You can think of it like sculpting. Your statue already exists. Now you're just kind of rounding the edges, polishing it up, making it look nice, chiseling in those fine details, making the piece pop. But you also kind of have to be careful not to make this classic mistake that I see all the time. To explain this, we need to talk about the chef and the food critic. The music producer is kind of like the chef. The chef's goal is to make something delicious and exciting, this final piece. A food critic doesn't always cook, but they are trained at evaluating texture and balance and detail, and they've got a really refined palate. You can kind of think of the mix engineer as like the food critic. Now, knowing how a food critic thinks is going to help the chef cook better, but becoming a food critic doesn't make you a better chef. That just makes you a chef and a food critic. As a producer, understanding mixing will definitely help you to be a better producer. But becoming a mix engineer isn't the answer to making you a better producer, because they're two different things. You can be a mix engineer and a producer, or you can just be a producer, or you can just be a mix engineer. So you should decide how deep you want to go. Ask yourself where you are on this scale. 1, streamline. I just want the basics so I can focus more on producing. 2, in depth. I'm ready to invest some time and learn a bit more of a structured and detailed mixing process. And 3, the engineer. I want to dive deep into mixing as its own separate craft. It's important to note this because more effort in mixing doesn't always mean better results. So let's just zoom out for a moment. Some people will probably disagree with me here, but every mix boils down into these 2 umbrella categories. 1, fixing problems. 2, coloring. And just those 2 categories by themselves, that is the streamlined process. But I'm going to break these into 5 smaller categories so that you can go a little bit more in depth if you want to. Now, with mixing, we're no longer producing. When you're producing, you're thinking about each individual element, your bass line, your synth, your drums, your kick drum, and you're piecing them together. You're thinking about individual things. When we're mixing, we're thinking about the interactions between those elements, what happens when you put them together, and how they can fit into a space. You might have seen something like this before. This is an incredible drawing that I did. I love those 90s diagrams, but they are kind of cheesy. This just refers to how our track lives in a 3D space in mixing, because we have 3 different planes of space, being frequency spectrum, stereo spectrum, and depth. Okay, these are our goals in the mixing process. 1, beat the premix. And 2, this is going to sound stupid, but don't go backwards. It's harder than it sounds. Step 1 of 5 of our mixing process is something that sounds really boring, but it's actually more important than you might think. There's one crucial reason as to that. This is the setup stage, right? So I'm not actually doing any mixing at this point. I'm just setting up my project to optimize and get it ready for mixing. The main idea is to get it into a new project so that I can switch my mindset into mixing mode. But the crucial point here is to bring in that exported premix that we exported at the end of the arrangement into our new mixing project so that we have something to refer to, so that I can make sure that I'm going forwards and not making things worse. Then it's just a matter of trying to beat the premix. That's pretty much it. All right, so this is what my project looks like after setting it up for a mix down. I spend about an hour doing this, and this is worth every minute. And you can see that everything is like color-coded and into these different groups. I always have these 5 groups: drums, bass, effects and transitions, synths, ambience. If I have vocals, then there will be a vocal group as well. But these are the premixes. So I've got my full premix here. I've also got the drums premix reference, and I've got just the low end, which is just the kick and the bass soloed. And then this track, I just also decided to have my drums and my bass group. So this way, as I'm making adjustments, I can flick back and forth between each one of these premixes and be like, okay, that's what my drums was sounding like before I started mixing, and this is what it's sounding like now when I'm mixing it. I'm just making sure that I'm going in the right direction. Very important. Okay, so stage 2. We should think about a mix down kind of like building a house. You need to start with the foundations, then you build the frame, and then you build the walls, then you put the roof on, and then after that, you decorate it and make it look really nice. This is kind of the same thing. So we want to start with our most fundamental part of the mix down. So that way we can solve problems at the source rather than just trying to throw plugins on things to try and solve things for you and actually creating more problems for yourself. And that's why you should start with just your volume, faders, and your EQ. And I'd recommend practicing a fader mix. So I do my volume and my EQ at the same time, and that's because they're related to each other. They're cousins. We'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But in terms of the fader mix, what you want to know is keep the groups at 0, but all the individual tracks, so there's a hats group here, I'm not going to touch that one. All of the individual tracks, I bring all the faders down. I'm also taking off any sends, any panning, taking off any sends. I can reset them later, bringing the faders down, bring the faders down. And we're going to be putting them all back in, but we're going to be doing it in a slightly different way. Okay, so setting faders. I'll start with my kick drum, and I'm looking at the peak reader here. It's also going through this group, which has a little bit of processing on it. If that's peaking at about -10, then I will never have headroom problems. I'm starting with my foundations, my kick and my bass and my drums, and then I'm starting to bring everything else in. And so there's a little bit of technique behind setting the faders. So I'm going to grab this fader and pull it up to when it's too loud, right there. Intentionally pull it up too loud and then pull it too quiet. Now I know that my perfect fader level is going to be somewhere between the too loud point and the too quiet point. And then I'm going to bring it up from where it's too quiet and find that spot where it needs to sit. And we're going to do this with all the elements. Let's just start with the drums. Too loud, too quiet. The reason why we do it like this is you bring it too loud, it allows your ear to grab onto that element. You bring it too quiet, you know where the lowest point is. And as you slowly bring it up, it allows your ear to find where the spot is easier Then if it's too loud and you're bringing it down, you kind of want to go underneath the point and then slowly go into it. And that's just fader technique. Okay, so I want to play a game. The point of this game is to describe how volume and EQ are linked together. So let's have a look here. This is a classic EQ curve. This is just a low boost, boosting our low frequencies, everything from 400 hertz onwards by 6 decibels. So what is the difference between this and this? This is a high shelf, reducing our high frequencies, everything from 400 hertz above by 6 decibels. The only difference between these two EQs is this volume knob. If I have a low boost EQ and then I turn the volume down by minus 6 decibels, those two things combine together to create this EQ here. It's just a high shelf because I'm boosting the low frequencies, bringing down everything, and now I've got a reduction in my high frequencies. So those two things are actually the same. The only difference is 6 decibels of gain. Number 2 here, we've got a boost at 100 hertz by 6 decibels. That is actually the same as this. I'm cutting out everything except 100 hertz. The volume knob is the difference between these two. So this minus 6 decibels of gain equals this. What about this one? We're going to boost at 100 hertz and one at 3.3K. If we turn it down by 6 decibels, we get this. That's just a cut at 1K. Last one here. Now this one was inspired by a student I was working with. I came back after a mixing session and he had all these like really sharp boosts at particular frequencies. And my immediate thought was, I'm going to need to pull down that volume fader because it's too loud now. But what that actually did was this. It just reduced the frequencies of everything else. So then everything else sounds quite dull except for those frequencies that you boosted. So we need to take into consideration there's a direct relationship between volume and EQ. They're linked together. As for your EQs, you only need 3 different types. 1, utility style EQ. I'm just going to cut low end out of things that don't need low end. 2, tonal shaping EQs. Now these are gentler slopes and cuts. As I bring it down, you can see that it's a combination between 2 different slopes all at once. Tonal shaping EQs are more gradual, and we want them to sound smooth. These ×4 slopes here, they sound quite unnatural because they're very abrupt. The last type is surgical EQ, removing particular problem frequencies. All you need is those 3 types of EQs. And now I'm going through my project, doing my volume faders and then my EQs. I'm starting with my foundations. I'm probably going to start with my low end first and try and get that working, and then kind of piece things around it one by one. Step 3 is dynamics and width. So now I'm checking our width, our mid-side processing, and our peaks. Pretty much with the width stuff, I just need to make sure that there's no low end in the sides. I want to give width to things that I want to be larger and take width from things that I don't need to take up all that space. So this track here, let's just have a listen to this kind of like textural, deep. Ulean Loudness Meter is an awesome free plugin, and you can just hit this S button here or turn it off, and this will give you peaks. You can see my kick drum is my loudest element here. Essentially, we'll put this on my master track and then solo the different groups of my mix down, see what the peaks are doing. It's usually some peaks in the drums that I have to fix. I would do that with something like this tool here. It's called Standard Clip. It's like 20 euros or something. It's a clipper. It's essentially a limiter that also distorts things. It doesn't really have any peak problems because I've already mixed it. But bring this guy down and you can see that this red line here is where it just hard clips anything that goes over that point. So that's a good tool to fix peak problems. I'm also thinking about width, right? So in this track, I wanted this wah pad here to be really wide. This is Ozone Imager 2. It's another free plugin. And I've just gone in here and like just kind of boosted this. So it just takes up a little bit more width space. If you want to listen to just sides, go into audio effects and type in sides only. And there's a preset that solos just the sides. And if I hit play, you hear, sounds really weird, but this is what's happening just in the sides. And I would go through each track and make sure that it has the right amount of width, doesn't have any low end in the sides. If I want to give it more width, then I do that. I'm just making sure that I'm thinking about that left and right stereo spectrum. Step 4 is coloring. And this is where we're adding things like group processing. This is where I'm doing my reverb and delay sends, but also my creative sends for tone. For instance, on this track, this radiator is being driven on this group. And that's just kind of like distorting all the drums together so that when the kick hits, it's kind of clamping everything in. And then I'm also doing some send processing here. And I've just thrown a whole bunch of effects onto a send. I've got some compression, I've got some vinyl distortion, I've got an EQ, I've got some noise, and I've got another distortion unit. This is me just messing around with the send, sending some things into it and seeing if it sounds better or worse. In this case, I've just added a tiny little bit of it. It's just adding a little bit more crispiness to the top of some of the elements that we have in this project here. So sends are like a mixing engineer's best friend because we can do all this crazy stuff and get really creative throwing a whole bunch of effects on there. It's not a scientific process. And then just add a little bit of it back in to help color and tone our whole project. It's really adding some grit to the top of the synths here. All right, step 5, finalizing my mixdown. This stage is simple. I'm exporting my project and listening on a few different systems. So maybe I might listen on some Bluetooth speakers and Apple headphones and maybe in my car. And then I will repeat my first listen process again, right? Remember this one? So I'll take a break, 24 hours or so, and I'll do my first listen again. Write down my notes, and then I'll go through one by one and fix those notes. And then that's it. You've got a finished mix down that you're ready to send to a mastering engineer. So that's the process, but I want to make this clear because knowing a generalized process isn't yet enough to just finish music whenever you want. So here's your steps ongoing in order to make this actually beneficial for you. 1, you need to tailor your own process, the genre you're making, your strengths and your weaknesses, your knowledge gaps. All of this comes into account. You need to make your process personal to you. Number 2, once you build your own process, you have to test it by putting it into action, see what works and what doesn't. If you have problems that still arise, note what those problems are and tweak and iterate on your process so that it overcomes those problems or at least reduces the chance of them. And even with those 2 things, this still doesn't mean much unless you genuinely believe in your process. So it's a little bit of a psychology thing, but you kind of have to prove your process to yourself. And the way that you do that is with evidence in the form of past finished music. So you got to take your ideas all the way through and finish them. And that will give you this like subconscious evidence that, hey, I actually can do this. This is where self-confidence comes from. This is how you silence the self-doubt.